This week we're starting to learn about the Cold War, so this PowerPoint is to give you kind of an introduction about what it's about and who's involved. Just as a little review, the world is coming out of World War II. 50 million people died, millions more were wounded. After the war, the US and the Soviet Union will emerge as the most powerful countries in the world. So, they created the United Nations, hopefully to prevent another conflict. The United Nations was kind of like the League of Nations, where it was an international peacekeeping organization, and we still have the United Nations today. However, after World War II, there was so much distrust and competition between the two major countries that they are going to conflict with each other. Okay, this is a map of basically the two sides, although now the sides have to do with ideologies or a political stance on what and how they want to govern their country. So the green countries are NATO nations. This is an organization that we'll learn about later, but they all join a group, the NATO group, and they are democratic. They're all the green nations, so Norway, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Turkey, Greece, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Denmark, the UK. All of these green countries are democratic. Now, all of the red countries are part of another group called the Warsaw Pact nations, and they're going to be communist. So as you can see, it's the Soviet Union, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. These countries are all communist. And all of the gray countries are not aligned with either side. So it's kind of the northern part of Africa here, and Sweden and Finland. So, what was the Cold War? After World War II ended, which was in 1945, the US and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers. This is what they're going to be referred to throughout the unit, so make sure you're paying attention to that vocabulary word. They were superpowers. However, they had a difference in philosophies of government, and this created intense opposition throughout the last part of the 20th century. So the US and the Soviet Union are going to be fighting, maybe not physically, but they're going to be fighting verbally about their philosophies of government. The US is going to be fighting for democracy, and the Soviet Union is going to be fighting for communism. So the reason why they called it a Cold War is because instead of military combat, they fought for influence. So they didn't fight each other, they fought each other for influence around the world. So they would attack each other verbally, and they fought for either American democracy or Soviet communism. So Americans were going to try and get other countries to become democratic, and the Soviet Union was going to try and get other countries to become communist so that they could have influence around the world. This also started a competition, which is known as an arms race. An arms race is when both countries build up a supply of weapons and nuclear weapons, so like guns and things like that, but also the nuclear weapons that we saw from World War II. And everyone was really concerned because the whole world knew that if the US and the Soviet Union did actually go to war where they fought each other, then they would destroy each other and probably the rest of the world because of the fact that both sides had these nuclear weapons. This chart over here is describing the number of warheads or nuclear weapons that each country has. So the US is this blue, and the USSR, also known as Russia, is this red. However, there is going to be what is called hot wars. Hot wars are going to be conflict that sparks up around the world, but is still representing communist and democracy fighting. Because people were worried, especially in the US, people were worried about the spread of communism. So this is going to spark the Korean War and the Vietnam War. But remember, the USSR, the Soviet Union, and the US never fought each other directly. It's all going to be through these other little wars happening around the world. And we're going to learn about the Korean War and the Vietnam War later. Because people feared what would actually happen if they fought each other because both sides had nuclear weapons.